It always starts quietly, a voice you can't hear but you can feel, a soft hum beneath the chaos of someone's perfectly controlled smile. Maybe it's the tap of a pen on a wooden desk. Maybe it's the cold reflection of a mirror at 2 a.m., where someone stares at themselves with a mixture of admiration and emptiness. Imagine a person who walks into a room and instantly fills it, not because they shine, but because they need to. A presence that demands attention without saying a word. You sense something magnetic, yet something hollow, like a beautifully wrapped gift box with nothing inside. You've met someone like this. Maybe you love them. Maybe they broke you. Maybe they made you feel invisible. But here's the truth no one tells you: behind that confidence, behind that charm, behind that flawless mask lies a storm. And today, we're stepping straight into the eye of it. Key point 1, origin: how they become this way. Narcissistic personality disorder doesn't appear out of thin air. It grows silently, layer after layer, like rings in a tree trunk, each ring telling a story of survival, protection, and emotional hunger that was never fed. And while many people assume narcissists are simply born with some twisted wiring, the truth is far more complex, far more tragic and haunting, because most people who develop these traits were once incredibly vulnerable children who either received far too much admiration or not nearly enough, children who were told they were perfect, or children who were treated like they were invisible, children who learned that love was conditional, that affection depended on performance, that their worth lived outside of them instead of within. And so they crafted a version of themselves that could survive, a version that could win approval, attention, validation, creating the earliest foundations of a personality built not on self-love but on self-defense. And this origin story varies from child to child. Some grow up with overly indulgent parents who believe their child is superior to others, unintentionally planting the seeds of entitlement, while others grow up with emotionally unavailable, dismissive, or even abusive parents, forcing the child to create a false self. A persona so grand and confident that nobody could ever see the cracks beneath it. And research shows that early environments play a massive role. Inconsistent affection, unpredictable parenting, conditional praise, and emotional neglect are some of the strongest predictors of narcissistic traits later in life. But here's the part that people rarely hear. Many narcissists weren't allowed to feel normal emotions like fear, sadness, insecurity, or embarrassment, because expressing these meant weakness, and weakness was punished. So the child slowly buried every softer part of themselves until all that remained on the surface was confidence, armor, superiority, a shield powerful enough to keep others from seeing their emotional starvation. And this explains why narcissists often appear emotionally detached or cold. They were trained to disconnect from their own feelings, trained to build walls so high even they can't see over them. And yet inside those walls is a child who desperately needed love, but learned that needing anything was dangerous. So they replaced need with control, replaced vulnerability with perfection, replaced insecurity with an inflated self-image, and people often wonder, are they born or made? The answer is both, because temperament plays a small role, but environment shapes everything, especially the emotional injuries that form their core. And there's a rare psychological insight: most don't know narcissism often begins as a reaction to deep shame, not arrogance, meaning they don't feel superior. They fear they're not enough, so they overcompensate, exaggerate, build, polish, and perfect a persona they believe will protect them. But this protection has a cost. For the more they depend on admiration, the less they know who they really are. And by adulthood, this false identity becomes so fused with their survival that they no longer recognize it's a mask. And here's the shocking contradiction: they crave love intensely yet are terrified of it, because love requires vulnerability, and vulnerability threatens the fragile self they spent their whole life protecting. So their origins are not rooted in malice, but in emotional fractures that never healed. And now everything they are, their charm, their confidence, their intensity, their hunger for validation, is simply the adult echo of a child who learned that being real was too dangerous. 3 Key point 2, how they live, think, act, and affect others. To truly understand someone with narcissistic personality disorder, you must step behind their eyes and into the storm of their internal world, because on the surface they appear composed, charismatic, confident, even magnetic, but inside they are constantly calculating, constantly scanning for threats to their ego, constantly searching for admiration like oxygen, and their daily life is a never-ending performance where every interaction feels like a stage and every person feels like an audience member whose applause determines their worth. And when you talk to them, they listen not to understand you, but to evaluate the impact of your words. Are you praising them, admiring them, challenging them, diminishing them? Because anything that threatens their self-image activates their deepest fear, the fear of being insignificant. And this fear drives everything, from their charming behavior to their manipulative tactics, and in relationships they live in cycles: idealization, devaluation, withdrawal, because they crave connection but cannot tolerate closeness. They want admiration but fear exposure. They want love but cannot accept it unless it comes with submission. And here's where the emotional micro stories reveal the truth. Imagine a narcissist waking up next to someone they claim to love. Yet the first thought is not, how are they feeling today? But do they still admire me? Imagine them scrolling through messages, not to communicate, but to check who validates them. Imagine them entering a room and instantly judging whether they are the most important person there, because this is their psychological blueprint, a mind built on comparisons, control, image, and perception. And when they feel insecure, they may manipulate, sometimes subtly, sometimes overtly, using guilt, charm, silence, or emotional pressure to maintain their sense of superiority, not because they enjoy controlling others, but because losing control feels like psychological death. And here's a shocking reality: narcissists don't manipulate to hurt, they manipulate to stabilize their fragile identity. And while their behavior harms others deeply, the intention isn't cruelty, it's survival. But this survival instinct creates patterns that leave others drained, confused, or questioning their own reality, especially because narcissists often rewrite events to maintain their self-image, a behavior known as cognitive distortion. And this leads to misconceptions, which is why we must slide a myth vs. reality truth inside this paragraph. Myth: narcissists love themselves. Reality: they are terrified of looking inward because they fear they will find nothing worth loving. And myth: they are confident. Reality: their confidence is a fragile shell that cracks anytime someone fails to validate them. And myth: they don't care about anyone. Reality: they care deeply, but only when caring reinforces their identity, not when it threatens it. And these internal contradictions make them unpredictable, oscillating between kindness and cruelty, attention and distance, affection and emotional coldness, because their behavior is driven by emotional triggers invisible to others, like being ignored, being challenged, being outshined, or being questioned. And these triggers activate their survival instincts, leading them to lash out or shut down without understanding why. And this is why so many people feel confused after encountering a narcissist. They feel hypnotized by the charm, but wounded by the detachment, drawn in by the intensity, but drained by the emotional demand. And all of this exists because a narcissist lives in a psychological battlefield where every moment is a fight to maintain the illusion of self. Key point 3: emotional and humanized perspective. Now comes the part most people never hear. The part where the narcissist stops being a villain and becomes a human being shaped by wounds they never chose. Because behind the arrogance lies fear, behind the confidence lies shame, behind the superiority lies emptiness. And while their behavior can be harmful, painful, even destructive, we must understand that narcissists are not evil. They are emotionally injured people whose survival mechanisms became their personality. And when you step inside their mind, everything changes, because it is dark, loud, conflicted, filled with constant internal tension, where every emotion feels magnified and every insecurity feels fatal. And imagine waking up every day feeling like you must prove your worth to exist. Imagine believing that if people saw the real you, they would abandon you instantly. Imagine craving affection but being terrified of the vulnerability it requires, because this is their contradiction. They want closeness but avoid it. They want admiration but fear exposure. They want love but sabotage it. And it's not because they choose to. It's because their emotional wiring was built to protect them, not connect them. And inside their mind, there is a constant dialogue, a war between their false self, confident, superior, perfect, and their true self, hidden, insecure, desperate for acceptance. And this battle shapes every decision they make, every reaction, every relationship. And when they hurt others emotionally, they don't fully understand the depth of what they've done, because acknowledging harm requires vulnerability, and vulnerability threatens the identity that keeps them psychologically alive. And here's a heartbreaking truth: narcissists rarely feel safe enough to be their real selves. And even when they want to change, they don't know how, because they have spent their entire lives running from the pain that created them. And this is why empathy matters, not for excusing their behavior, but for understanding the human inside the armor, the child inside the adult, the wound inside the personality. Because once you see them humanly, you understand that narcissism isn't a choice, but a protective shell that hardened over time. And healing is possible, but only when they choose to confront the parts of themselves they've avoided their whole life. And this moment of humanization is not to make you stay with a narcissist or tolerate abuse, but to teach you that people become who they are for reasons rooted in pain, not evil. Final message: if you know someone who shows these patterns, keep a healthy distance. but gently encourage them to seek professional help. Mental health conditions aren't a choice, but treatment is the only path toward healing. And encouraging someone to get help is something you do only when you truly want something good for them.